My dad made me deliver my baby brother at age 10, then told me I'd killed him for losing faith when he was born blue. When I begged him to call an ambulance the second time, he slapped me and said, "You've poisoned God's plan enough." I stayed silent. That was 6 years ago. This morning, he was crying in the back of a police car while my brother held my hand. What's the worst thing you've ever been blamed for? When I was 10 years old, my father made me deliver my baby brother in our bathroom. That brother survived, but not all of them would. My parents belonged to a religious movement that believed hospitals interfered with God's plan for birth. Dad led our local chapter and made me his assistant because he said children's hands were blessed with innocence. What he really meant was that if something went wrong, it was easier to blame a child than admit his beliefs were culling people. My training started with delivering other families' babies while Dad supervised, teaching me to check dilation and turn breech babies with my small fingers. By the time Mom got pregnant again when I was 11, I'd delivered 14 babies successfully. Dad praised me at church, calling me God's littlest midwife, while I stood there knowing one mistake would make me a murderer in their eyes. When Mom went into labor with my brother Isaac, Dad had me check her progress every hour. After 20 hours, she was exhausted and Isaac's heartbeat was weakening. I begged Dad to call an ambulance, but he grabbed my shoulders and said if I didn't have faith, the baby would feel it. "His life is in your hands," he said. "Don't you dare let doubt enter this room." Isaac was born blue and silent after 36 hours. I tried everything to save him while Dad prayed over us. When he finally took my dead brother from me, the first thing he said was, "Your fear culled him. God can't work through faithless hands." The church held a funeral where Dad preached about faithless children who let doubt poison God's miracles. I was 12 years old, banned from attending births, carrying the weight of a dead baby in hands that had only tried to help. Mom got pregnant again when I was 14. Dad didn't want me involved, but she went into labor early while he was at a church conference 2 states away. He called me, his voice deadly calm, and said this was my chance at redemption. Save this baby and God forgives Isaac. Fail again and you'll answer for 2 souls. I could see the cord was wrapped wrong, but I didn't have the tools or knowledge to fix it. My sister Faith lived for 3 minutes while Dad listened on the phone. His silence was worse than screaming. When he finally spoke, he just said, "We'll discuss your punishment when I get home." At the church meeting, he detailed my failures in front of 40 people. They prayed over me for hours, trying to cast out whatever demon made my hands bring death instead of life. After Faith died, Dad's solution was to have others assist while I watched from the corner, forbidden from helping even in emergencies. When Sister Catherine's baby got stuck and she begged for my small hands that had turned dozens of breech babies, Dad physically held me back. 3 more babies died that year while I watched silently. When I turned 16, Mom got pregnant one last time at 43. Dad kept me locked in my room during her labor, but after 18 hours, I heard screaming that wasn't normal. I broke down my door and found her hemorrhaging while the church women prayed. I delivered the baby alive, but Mom had been bleeding too long. She died holding my hand, whispering that she loved me. Dad pulled me away and declared to everyone that I'd culled her by interfering with God's plan. 3 babies, and now their mother, he announced. The devil's own daughter. The baby survived, but Dad banned me from touching him. I became a ghost in my own house while Dad raised Samuel with church women who crossed themselves when I passed. For 2 years, I lived like that, while Dad preached about how one doubting child had brought God's judgment on an entire bloodline. Then I heard Dad on the phone with another church member whose pregnant wife had complications. After 2 years of calling me cursed, Dad wanted me to deliver their baby because my hands were still the best for difficult births. If anything went wrong, they'd blame me. If the baby lived, it would prove Dad's power to redeem even the fallen. 2 weeks later, Sister Rebecca went into labor early. I recognized the same complications that had culled Mom. I told Dad she needed a hospital or she'd die. He slapped me and said my faithlessness was already poisoning the birth, but I was 18 now, not 10. I called 911 while Dad screamed that I was murdering another baby. Rebecca survived because of emergency surgery, but Dad had recorded me defying him and calling outsiders. He showed the edited video at church, leaving out Rebecca's dying screams. The congregation voted unanimously to stone me for blasphemy. They gave me 3 days to prepare my soul. I ran that night, but the church's young men caught me at the river and dragged me back. They locked me in the basement where Dad had prepared my judgment. The congregation had already gathered stones in neat piles. Through the window, I could see them preparing the field. Dad came down one last time to explain that my execution would finally cleanse our community. 4 deaths on your hands, he said, but your death will sanctify them. He showed me the white dress they'd chosen for my stoning, the same one Mom had worn to give birth, still stained with her blood. He locked the door behind him, leaving me to count the hours until sunrise when I would die in the same dress my mother did. The basement window was too small for escape, but I could hear them gathering outside. Through the narrow opening, I saw Brother Samuel helping carry stones, his 12-year-old arms straining under the weight. He'd grown so much in the 2 years since Mom died. I pressed my forehead against the cold concrete wall and forced myself to think. Dad had trained me to stay calm during births when mothers panicked and babies got stuck. This was just another impossible delivery, except this time I had to birth myself into survival. The door at the top of the stairs opened. Sister Martha's footsteps descended slowly, carrying something that clinked against the wooden rail. She appeared with a tray of bread and water, her face carefully neutral. Martha had lost twins 3 years ago during a birth I'd assisted. Dad blamed their deaths on my doubt, but she'd grabbed my hand afterward and whispered that I'd done everything right. She set the tray on the floor and turned to leave. Then she stumbled, her knee hitting the concrete hard. I rushed to help her up and felt her press something small and metal into my palm, a hairpin. Martha climbed the stairs without looking back. I heard the lock click, then her voice through the door telling someone she'd fed the condemned. My fingers explored the hairpin's shape. Dad had taught me to pick locks when I was 8, saying midwives needed access to supply closets during emergencies, another skill that served his purposes until it didn't. I worked the hairpin in the lock for 20 minutes, feeling for the tumblers Dad had shown me. The mechanism finally gave way with a soft click. I eased the door open and peered up the stairs. The house above was quiet, but I could hear voices from the field where they were preparing. The white dress hung on a hook by the door, Mom's blood still visible despite someone's attempt to wash it. I left it there and crept up the stairs in my regular clothes. The house felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Familiar objects turned strange by my desperation. Dad's study door stood open. His desk held the edited video he'd shown the congregation, but I knew he kept the full recordings. He documented everything, believing God would vindicate him through evidence. I found the original footage in his locked drawer, the one he thought I didn't know about. Footsteps on the porch made me freeze. The front door opened and Brother Thomas has called out that they were ready to begin at sunrise. Only an hour left. I grabbed the video camera and recordings, then slipped through the kitchen toward the back door. Samuel stood there in his pajamas, blocking my path. We stared at each other in the dim light. He'd been taught to fear me, told I'd culled our siblings and mother, but he'd also been young enough to remember me singing him to sleep when Dad was gone. He stepped aside. I ran through the backyard toward the woods, but shouts erupted behind me. They'd discovered the empty basement. Dad's voice rose above the others, commanding them to spread out and find me. I heard him tell them I'd stolen sacred property, proof of my guilt. The woods were thick and I knew them well from years of gathering herbs for births, but so did the church's young men who hunted these paths. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush, calling out sightings to each other. I climbed the old oak tree where Samuel and I used to play before Mom died. The hunters passed beneath, their flashlights sweeping the ground. Dad's voice carried through the trees, reminding them that letting me escape would bring God's judgment on everyone. When they moved deeper into the woods, I descended and doubled back toward town. The gas station on Route 49 had a payphone. If I could reach it, I could call who? The police Dad had convinced were persecuting our faith? The hospital that had saved Rebecca but made me a pariah? I stayed in the shadows, moving through backyards I'd visited for births. Mrs. Henderson's house still had a key under the ceramic frog. She was at the stoning field with everyone else. I slipped inside and found her phone. My hands shook as I dialed Rebecca's sister in the next county. She'd left our church years ago, called a backslider and worse. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. I explained everything in rushed whispers. She told me to hide and she'd come, but it would take 40 minutes. I didn't have 40 minutes. I'm really curious about how she learned to deliver babies when she was just 10 years old. That's so young to handle something that serious. How did her small hands actually help turn breech babies? Through the window, I could see the sun starting to rise. The church's van pulled up outside. Dad stepped out with 4 elders, their faces grim. They'd figured out where I'd go. I grabbed the video camera and ran out the back, but Brother Andrew tackled me in the garden. They dragged me back toward the field. Dad walked beside us, explaining how my rebellion proved my guilt. The camera had fallen in the struggle, its contents scattered. He picked up a tape and smiled. The congregation waited in a circle, their stones ready. They'd dressed Samuel in white to throw the first stone, teaching him to destroy what threatened their faith. Dad pushed me into the center and began reading charges, but Rebecca stood at the edge of the crowd on crutches, still recovering from her emergency surgery. She called out that she wanted to testify. Dad tried to silence her, but she raised her voice louder. She told them how I'd saved her life by calling the hospital, how Dad would have let her bleed to death like my mother, how many babies had died while he stopped me from helping. Other women began murmuring, remembering their own losses. Dad ordered them to proceed, but doubt was spreading through the crowd like labor pains. Martha stepped forward and admitted she'd helped me escape because she couldn't watch another child die for Dad's pride. The rebellion might have ended there, but Samuel dropped his stone. My 12-year-old brother walked to where I knelt and stood between me and Dad. He said he remembered me saving his life when he was born, even if Dad made everyone pretend otherwise. Dad grabbed a stone himself, ready to restore order through violence, but car doors slammed at the edge of the field. Rebecca's sister had brought others, former church members who'd left after losing children. They walked through the crowd, calling out names of babies who'd died while Dad prevented real help. The congregation began dispersing, their faith in Dad cracking like eggs about to hatch. He stood there still holding his stone, watching his authority dissolve. He'd built his power on their fear of judgment, but now they feared the judgment of continuing to follow him. I stood on shaking legs, still wearing the clothes I'd lived in for 3 days in the basement. Dad raised the stone, his face twisted with rage at losing control, but the people he'd dominated for years closed around me, finally choosing to protect life instead of doctrine. The stone fell from Dad's hand as the crowd pressed closer, their faces no longer showing blind obedience, but something harder to control, doubt mixed with anger. I stumbled backward, my legs barely holding me after 3 days in the basement. Rebecca's sister, Victoria, pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arm around my shoulders, steadying me. Dad's voice boomed across the field, commanding everyone to step back. His authority had always worked before, but now people hesitated. Some moved away out of habit, but others stood firm. I could see the calculation in his eyes as he counted who remained loyal and who had turned. Victoria guided me toward her car, but Dad blocked our path. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into the same spots where rope marks still showed from my capture at the river. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Victoria attempted to intervene, but Brother Thomas and 2 other elders surrounded us. The crowd watched, torn between their conditioning and their conscience. Dad began reciting scripture about false prophets and the punishment for leading the faithful astray. His voice carried the same hypnotic rhythm he used during sermons, and I saw some people's resolve wavering. Then Martha spoke up again, louder this time. She reminded everyone about her twins, how I'd fought to save them while Dad insisted prayer alone would suffice. Other mothers joined her, each naming a child lost to Dad's doctrine. The testimonies came faster, overlapping, creating a chorus of grief that had been silenced for years. Dad released my wrist and raised both hands, trying to regain control. He proclaimed that their losses were tests of faith, that questioning God's plan would only bring more suffering, but his words rang hollow against the weight of so many small coffins. Samuel remained between Dad and me, his 12-year-old frame trembling but determined. Dad ordered him to move, but my brother shook his head. The defiance from his favored son seemed to shake Dad more than all the mother's testimonies combined. Victoria used the distraction to pull me toward her car again. This time we made it several steps before Brother Andrew grabbed my other arm. A tug of war began, with me as the rope. My shoulders screamed from the strain, but I couldn't break free from either side. Rebecca hobbled forward on her crutches, moving faster than seemed possible for someone recovering from emergency surgery. She swung one crutch at Brother Andrew's knee, and he released me with a yelp. Victoria yanked me forward and we ran, leaving the crowd in chaos behind us. We reached Victoria's car, but the tires had been slashed. Dad had prepared for every possibility. Victoria cursed and pulled me toward the tree line instead. Behind us, I heard Dad organizing pursuit teams, dividing the congregation between those who would hunt and those who would pray for my capture. The woods offered cover, but also danger. I knew these paths, but so did our pursuers. Victoria struggled through the underbrush in her city clothes while I moved more easily despite my exhaustion. We headed deeper into the forest, away from the main trails. After 20 minutes of running, we stopped to catch our breath. Victoria pulled out her phone, but there was no signal this deep in the woods. We needed to reach the highway, but that meant circling back toward the church property. Voices echoed through the trees. The search parties were spreading out, trying to cut off our escape routes. I recognized recognized Brother Thomas's voice directing teams to block the main paths. They knew these woods from hunting trips, from gathering expeditions, from years of treating this land as their domain. Victoria and I moved quietly through the undergrowth, staying off the trails. My bare feet, toughened from years of walking these woods gathering herbs, found purchase on roots and rocks, but exhaustion made me clumsy. I stumbled over a fallen branch, the crack echoing through the forest. Shouts erupted nearby. They'd heard us. Victoria grabbed my hand and we ran blindly, branches tearing at our clothes and skin. The voices grew closer, coordinating to surround us. We burst into a small clearing I recognized. The old well stood in the center, abandoned since the church had dug a new one closer to the main buildings. I'd hidden here as a child when Dad's anger grew too fierce. Victoria started to run across the clearing, but I pulled her back. The search party emerged from 3 sides, closing in. Brother Andrew led one group, his face still twisted in pain from Rebecca's crush. Brother Thomas commanded another, and Dad himself appeared with a third. We were trapped. Dad stepped forward, his voice calm now that he had us cornered. He spoke about forgiveness, about second chances, about how my return would prove God's mercy. All I had to do was admit my sins and accept my punishment. The congregation would be lenient, he promised. Perhaps exile instead of execution. Victoria tried to shield me, but the men laughed. She was one woman against a dozen. Dad reminded her that she'd abandoned the faith years ago, that her words carried no weight here. He offered to let her leave unharmed if she released me. I felt Victoria's grip tighten. She refused Dad's offer, calling him a murderer who hid behind scripture. Dad's calm facade cracked. He ordered the men to take us both, saying Victoria could share my fate as a corrupter of the faithful. The men advanced slowly, confident in their numbers. I backed against the well's stone wall, feeling the rough edges dig into my spine. My fingers found a loose stone, worked free by years of weather. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Brother Andrew reached us first, still limping from his injured knee. I swung the stone at his head, but he ducked. His hands closed around my throat. Victoria clawed at his face, drawing blood, but he didn't let go. My vision blurred as his fingers tightened. I dropped the stone and grabbed his wrists, trying to break his grip. Other hands pulled at Victoria, dragging her away from me. I heard her screaming my name, but the sound seemed distant. Then Samuel appeared at Brother Andrew's side. My little brother held a thick branch, and he swung it with all his 12-year-old strength. It connected with Brother Andrew's temple, and his grip loosened. I gasped for air as he staggered backward. Dad roared at Samuel's betrayal. He grabbed his son by the shoulders, shaking him violently. Samuel dropped the branch but didn't apologize. He met Dad's eyes and repeated what he'd said at the stoning field, that I'd saved his life, that he remembered. The other men hesitated, unsure whether to continue their attack with Dad's own son defending me. In that moment of confusion, Victoria broke free. She grabbed my hand and pulled me around the well, putting it between us and our pursuers. Dad released Samuel and ordered the men to circle the well. They moved to surround us again, but slower now, their certainty shaken by Samuel's defiance. Dad picked up the branch Samuel had dropped, testing its weight. I pressed against the well's wall, feeling the old wooden cover shift under my hand. The boards were rotten, barely holding together. An idea formed through my exhaustion and fear. As the men closed in, I grabbed the well's cover and yanked it free. The wood splintered, revealing the dark shaft below. The smell of stagnant water rose from the depths. I held a piece of the broken cover like a shield, its jagged edges pointing outward. Dad ordered the men to be careful, warning them about the open well. Samuel swinging that branch like a tiny warrior defending his sister proves blood runs thicker than Dad's twisted sermons. Kid just earned himself the Best Brother of the Year award in the most dramatic way possible. The shift in terrain changed the dynamic. They couldn't rush us without risking someone falling into the shaft. They had to approach single file along the narrow stone rim. Brother Thomas came first, inching along the well's edge. I swung the broken wood at him, forcing him to lean back. His foot slipped on the moss-covered stone. For a moment, he teetered on the edge, arms windmilling, before Brother Andrew pulled him back to safety. Dad grew impatient. He commanded them to rush us all at once, saying God would protect the faithful. But the men had seen too much today. They'd heard the testimonies of dead children, seen Samuel defend me, watched their absolute leader's control crack. They hesitated. In that hesitation, we heard new voices approaching through the woods, not from the church's search parties, but from the opposite direction. Rebecca's voice called out, stronger than it should have been for someone on crutches. She'd brought more former church members, people who'd left over the years as their doubts grew too heavy to carry. They emerged into the clearing, a dozen adults who'd once knelt before Dad's authority. Some had lost children to his doctrine. Others had simply grown tired of the fear. They formed a line between us and Dad's men, their faces set with determination. Dad tried his old tactics, quoting scripture and threatening damnation. But these people had already faced their worst fears when they left the church. His words held no power over them anymore. Brother Thomas and some others backed away, unwilling to fight their former friends and family members. The circle around the well broke apart as Dad's force dwindled. Only the most loyal remained at his side. Victoria helped me step away from the well's edge. My legs shook so badly I could barely stand. Rebecca limped forward and pressed car keys into Victoria's hand, explaining she'd brought a working vehicle. We needed to leave while the situation remained balanced, but Dad wasn't finished. He still held the branch Samuel had used against Brother Andrew. His face had moved beyond rage into something colder. He advanced on Samuel, raising the weapon above his head. I couldn't let him hurt my brother. Despite my exhaustion, I threw myself between them. The branch came down hard across my shoulders, driving me to my knees. Dad raised it again, but Samuel wrapped his arms around Dad's waist, using all his weight to pull him off balance. Father and son struggled while everyone watched in shock. Dad tried to shake Samuel off, but my brother held tight. In the chaos, Dad stepped too close to the well's edge. The moss-covered stone betrayed him, as it had almost betrayed Brother Thomas. Dad's eyes widened as he felt himself falling. He dropped the branch and grabbed for anything to stop his descent. His fingers found Samuel's shirt, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he'd pull my brother down with him. I lunged forward and grabbed Samuel's arms, anchoring him as Dad's weight tried to drag him backward. Victoria joined me, and together we held Samuel as Dad dangled over the well's dark mouth, suspended only by his grip on his son's shirt. The fabric started to tear. Dad's face showed real fear for the first time I could remember. He begged Samuel to save him, invoking Father's love and God's commandments about honoring parents. Samuel sobbed but didn't let go, even as the shirt tore further. Others rushed to help, even some of Dad's own men. Whatever our differences, nobody wanted to watch a man fall to his death. Brother Thomas grabbed Dad's wrist just as the shirt gave way completely. Several men worked together to haul Dad back onto solid ground. He lay gasping gasping on the grass, his authority shattered more thoroughly than any argument could have achieved. The near-death experience had stripped away his facade of divine protection. He was just a man who'd nearly died because of his own violence. Samuel collapsed in my arms, sobbing. I held him tight, whispering that he'd done nothing wrong, that saving Dad's life was the right choice even after everything. Around us, the two groups mingled uncertainly, unsure how to proceed after such a dramatic reversal. Rebecca took charge, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced death and survived. She announced that the old ways were finished. The congregation could choose, stay and build something new based on love and medical science, or follow Dad into exile. But there would be no more forced births, no more dead babies, no more children blamed for adult failures. Some of Dad's most loyal supporters helped him to his feet. He looked around the clearing, seeing faces that had once hung on his every word now turned away. Even Brother Thomas wouldn't meet his eyes. The empire he'd built on fear and faith had crumbled in a single morning. Dad pointed at me one last time, trying to summon his old fire. He declared that I'd corrupted them all, that God's judgment would fall on everyone who stood with me, but his words sounded hollow, the threats of a defeated man clinging to past power. Victoria led me toward the path where Rebecca's car waited. Samuel walked beside us, his hand in mine. Behind us, the congregation split into those who would stay and those who would follow Dad into exile. The division was painful but necessary, like cutting away infected tissue to save the body. As we reached the tree line, I looked back one more time. Dad stood in the center of a shrinking circle of supporters, still preaching to anyone who would listen, but most had turned their backs, already discussing how to rebuild without him. The walk to the car felt endless. My body wanted to collapse with each step, but Samuel and Victoria kept me moving. Other former church members flanked us, creating a protective barrier against any last-minute attack. We found Rebecca's car parked on the old logging road. Victoria helped me into the back seat while Samuel climbed in beside me. As the engine started, I heard shouts from the woods. A few of Dad's remaining loyal followers had broken away to pursue us. Victoria drove fast over the rough road, the car bouncing violently over roots and rocks. In the side mirror, I saw figures emerging from the forest, but they were too far behind to catch us. Soon the woods gave way to paved roads, and the church compound disappeared behind us. Samuel leaned against my shoulder, exhausted from his ordeal. I stroked his hair, remembering when he was born, how I'd fought to help him take his first breath while Dad prayed over us. Now he'd fought to help me escape, completing a circle I'd never imagined. Victoria drove us to a safe house in the next county, a place where former church members could stay while rebuilding their lives. The small apartment was crowded with others who'd fled over the years, but they welcomed us warmly. A woman named Vida, who'd left after losing her daughter 5 years ago, helped clean and bandage my injuries. The rope burns on my wrists, the bruises from Brother Andrew's hands on my throat, the welt across my shoulders from Dad's branch. Each mark told part of the story. Samuel refused to leave my side. He'd been raised to fear and shun me, but those years of indoctrination had shattered in a single morning. He asked questions about our siblings who died, about Mom, about all the things Dad had forbidden him to know. I told him the truth, gently but honestly, about Isaac's blue face and silent chest, about Faith's 3 minutes of life, about Mom bleeding out while I tried desperately to save her. Samuel cried for the family he'd never really known, for the siblings Dad had taught him to forget. Victoria made phone calls, arranging longer-term shelter and legal protection. The state had laws against child endangerment, and my story of forced midwifery at age 10 would interest certain authorities, but I wasn't ready for that fight yet. First, I needed to heal and help Samuel adjust to life outside Dad's control. News trickled in throughout the day. The church compound was in chaos. About half the congregation had decided to stay and reform, while the others packed to follow Dad. Rebecca, despite her injuries, was organizing the reformers with Martha's help. They planned to invite real medical professionals to train them in safe birthing practices. The compound's isolation didn't have to mean ignorance. They could maintain their faith while embracing knowledge that would save lives. Dad's faction grew smaller as the day progressed. Some who'd initially chosen him changed their minds after hearing more testimonies from grieving parents. By evening, only his most fanatical supporters remained. Brother Thomas arrived at the safe house near sunset, looking haggard. He'd spent the day wrestling with his faith and conscience. Finally, he'd chosen truth over comfort. He brought disturbing news. Dad was planning something desperate. The remaining loyalists were preparing for what Dad called a purification. He claimed God had shown him a vision of cleansing fire that would punish the unfaithful and restore his authority. Brother Thomas feared Dad might burn the compound rather than let reformers have it. Victoria immediately called Rebecca to warn her. The reformers began evacuating the compound, taking important documents and personal belongings. They wouldn't fight Dad physically, but they wouldn't let him destroy what generations had built either. As night fell, I sat by the window with Samuel sleeping against my shoulder. The apartment was quiet except for occasional phone updates. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly. Dad and his core followers had barricaded themselves in the main church building, but they hadn't acted on the fire threat yet. I thought about all the babies I'd delivered in that building, the successful births that had reinforced Dad's doctrine, and the failures that had broken my heart. Each tiny life had mattered, whether Dad acknowledged it or not. The way everyone worked together to save Dad from falling even after all he'd done shows something deep about people. How do we decide in a split second between justice and mercy like that? Near midnight, we received word that state police had arrived at the compound. Someone, probably one of the evacuating reformers, had reported the fire threat. Dad's group surrendered without violence, perhaps realizing that martyrdom wouldn't restore their lost paradise. The immediate danger had passed, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Samuel would need therapy to process his trauma and build a life outside the cult. I would need to decide whether to pursue legal action against Dad for the years of abuse and the deaths he'd caused. The reformers would struggle to build their new community while dealing with grief and guilt over past losses. The exiled loyalists would either find new ways to practice their faith or possibly seek out another charismatic leader to follow. But tonight, in this crowded safe house, surrounded by others who'd found the courage to leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the false hope Dad had preached, built on denial and blame, but real hope born from truth and mutual support. Samuel stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about stones. I held him closer, promising silently that he'd never have to throw stones at anyone again. We'd both been tools in Dad's hands, but now we were free to choose our own paths. Victoria brought me tea and sat beside us. She'd risked everything to help me, this woman who'd been demonized for years simply for choosing her own life. I thanked her, but she waved it away. We were family, she explained, bound by shared experience if not by by blood. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook me, but I fought sleep, still afraid I'd wake up back in that basement, counting hours until execution. Victoria assured me they'd keep watch, that I was safe now. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time Samuel moved. The trauma would take time to heal, I knew, but we'd survive the worst. Dad's power was broken. The compound would be transformed or abandoned, and Samuel and I could finally mourn our mother and siblings properly, without Dad's toxic theology poisoning our grief. Mourning brought decisions. Where would we go? How would we live? I had no money, no job skills except midwifery, no legal identity outside the church, but the network of former members promised support. They'd walked this path before and would guide us through it. Samuel woke hungry and disoriented. The safe house kitchen was communal, and he marveled at choosing his own breakfast without asking permission. Such a small freedom, but it represented everything Dad had denied us. Over scrambled eggs, we discussed immediate plans. A family in the next state had offered us temporary housing. They'd left the church 3 years ago and understood what we faced. Samuel could start regular school while I figured out how to build an adult life from scratch. The thought terrified me. I'd been Dad's tool since age 10, then his scapegoat, then his prisoner. I didn't know how to be just myself, but looking at Samuel's trusting face, I found strength. He needed me to be strong, to guide him through this transition. Victoria drove us to the bus station that afternoon. The 3-day ordeal had left me weak and shaky, but I insisted on walking without help. Each step away from Dad's influence felt like a small victory. At the station, Victoria pressed money into my hand despite my protests. She also gave me a phone with important numbers programmed in. Lawyers who worked with cult survivors, therapists who understood religious trauma, doctors who could document my injuries for potential legal proceedings. Samuel had never ridden a bus before. He pressed his face to the window, watching the world pass by with wonder. Every town we passed through was a mystery to him, full of people who'd never heard Dad's sermons or feared his judgment. The bus rolled through unfamiliar landscapes while Samuel dozed against my shoulder. I watched the miles stretch between us and Dad's compound, each one making me breathe easier. Victoria had given us directions to the family who'd offered shelter, the Millers, who'd escaped 3 years ago after losing their daughter during a birth Dad had forbidden me from assisting. When we arrived at the station, Mrs. Miller waited with a handwritten sign bearing our names. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw us, and she wrapped Samuel in a fierce hug before turning to me. Her embrace felt different from anything I'd known, protective without possession, caring without control. Their home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Mr. Miller showed us to separate bedrooms, but Samuel refused to leave my side. We compromised by putting his mattress on my floor. That first night, he woke screaming about stones and fire. I held him until the trembling stopped, humming the same lullabies I'd sung when he was a baby. The next morning brought practical challenges. Samuel needed school enrollment, but he'd never attended formal education. The Millers helped navigate the paperwork while I watched, overwhelmed by forms asking for information I didn't have. Birth certificates, vaccination records, previous addresses. Dad had kept us invisible to the outside world. A local organization that helped cult survivors provided a volunteer advocate named Jonathan. He explained the process of establishing legal identities, obtaining documentation, and accessing services. The bureaucracy felt impossibly complex after a lifetime of Dad making every decision. Samuel struggled with basic academic concepts, but excelled at practical skills. Years of compound life had taught him carpentry, gardening, and animal care. The school counselor developed a modified curriculum to help him catch up while building on his strengths. I found work at a local greenhouse, my knowledge of medicinal herbs proving useful despite its dark origins. The owner, Mrs. Turner, didn't ask many questions about my past. She paid cash and let me work flexible hours around Samuel's school schedule. Nights remained difficult. Samuel's nightmares came in waves, sometimes about Mom's death, sometimes about the stoning, often mixing memories into surreal horrors. I'd wake to find him standing by my bed, afraid to disturb me, but unable to face the darkness alone. The Millers introduced us to other former cult members in the area. We met for potluck dinners where children played while adults shared resources and experiences. No formal organization, just people who understood without explanation why certain sounds made us flinch, or why we hoarded food despite full cupboards. News filtered in about the compound. Dad's remaining followers had scattered after his arrest. Some joined other religious communities. Others disappeared entirely. The reformers had transformed the main building into a birthing center staffed by certified midwives. They'd invited medical professionals to train interested members in safe delivery practices. Martha wrote letters updating us on the changes. She'd become the unofficial historian, documenting the stories of babies lost to Dad's doctrine, not for revenge, but for remembrance. Each small grave now bore a proper marker with names and dates. Samuel started making friends at school, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. He joined the gardening club and taught other students about composting and crop rotation. Watching him explain soil pH to his classmates, I saw glimpses of the teacher he might become. My greenhouse work expanded as Mrs. Turner discovered my talent for coaxing difficult plants to thrive. She offered to sponsor me for horticulture classes at the community college. The prospect terrified and thrilled me equally. I'd never imagined education beyond Dad's twisted lessons. Legal proceedings moved slowly. The state prosecutor built cases for child endangerment and criminal negligence, but Dad's lawyer argued religious freedom. Jonathan helped me prepare statements, warning that trials could take years. Justice might come eventually, but healing couldn't wait for courtrooms. Samuel's 13th birthday approached, his first outside the compound. The Millers helped plan a small party with his new friends. He requested no candles, the association with ceremony too painful. Instead, we planted a tree in their backyard, something that would grow as he did. Winter brought unexpected challenges. The shortened days triggered memories of basement darkness. I'd find myself checking locks obsessively, testing windows, planning escape routes from every room. The Millers never complained about my late-night wanderings, understanding the hypervigilance born from trauma. Samuel discovered art therapy through school counseling. His drawings evolved from dark scribbles to detailed landscapes, mixing compound memories with new experiences. One showed the old oak tree where we'd hidden, but surrounded by the maple trees from our new street, past and present intertwining. I started attending community college part-time, studying botany and business management. My younger classmates assumed I was just another student, unaware of the gaps in my knowledge or why I flinched when professors raised their voices. Each completed assignment felt like reclaiming pieces of a stolen education. Rebecca visited during spring break, walking without crutches now. She brought photos Photos of the transformed compound, bright medical equipment where prayer circles once gathered, educational posters replacing scripture banners. Several young women were training as midwives, learning what I'd been forced to discover through deadly trial and error. The greenhouse expanded, and Mrs. Turner offered me a management position. I'd proven myself reliable, knowledgeable, and good with customers who appreciated my patience with their gardening questions. The steady income meant Samuel and I could contribute to household expenses, easing our dependence on the Miller's charity. Summer arrived with new milestones. Samuel's first bus ride turning into a wide-eyed window tour of freedom might be the most pure thing here. Every town they pass is basically a whole universe where nobody knows Dad's favorite punishment methods. The Millers showing up with their handwritten sign feels like the world's most understated rescue mission, considering they lost their daughter to Dad's medical expertise. Mrs. Turner running a cash-only greenhouse that asks zero questions about mysterious herb knowledge. Samuel passed his grade-level assessments, officially caught up academically. He'd grown 3 inches and started asking difficult questions about faith, family, and forgiveness. I answered honestly, admitting my own struggles with concepts Dad had twisted beyond recognition. We visited Mom's grave for the first time since escaping. The Millers drove us to the old cemetery where compound members had been buried for generations. Samuel traced her name on the stone while I told him stories Dad had forbidden, how she'd sung while kneading bread, her secret candy stash, the way she'd whispered jokes during Dad's longest sermons. Victoria called regularly, checking our progress and sharing updates about other escapees. She'd started a nonprofit helping people leave high-control groups, using her experience to guide others through the practical and emotional challenges. Her voice always steadied me during difficult moments. The first anniversary of our escape approached. Samuel suggested visiting the compound, but I wasn't ready. Instead, we held our own memorial for our lost siblings. We planted flowers at a local park, blue forget-me-nots for Isaac, white roses for Faith, yellow sunflowers for Mom. Samuel read poems he'd written for the siblings he'd never known. Mrs. Turner promoted me to assistant manager, trusting me with ordering, scheduling, and training new employees. The responsibility felt overwhelming initially, but I discovered leadership skills born from years of managing crisis situations. My employees appreciated my calm during busy seasons and equipment failures. Samuel joined the school drama club, finding freedom in becoming someone else temporarily. His first performance was a small role in the spring play, but he delivered his lines with conviction that brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, he admitted he'd imagined himself as someone who'd never lived in fear. Legal developments finally emerged. Dad accepted a plea deal, 15 years for child endangerment and criminal negligence. No trial meant Samuel wouldn't have to testify, sparing him that trauma. Some felt the sentence too lenient, but I focused on the fact that he could no longer hurt anyone. The compound officially dissolved, its assets divided between reformers who'd stayed and survivors who'd fled. My portion was modest but meaningful, enough to start a small savings account for Samuel's future education. Money that had been tithed through fear now served hope. Samuel's growth continued impressing everyone. He tutored younger students in gardening, led nature walks for scout troops, and started a school recycling program. His teachers praised his maturity and compassion, unaware these traits had been forged in darkness. I completed my first year of college with a 3.8 GPA. My botany professor encouraged me to consider a 4-year degree, possibly even graduate school. The girl who'd been denied basic education now dreamed of contributing to agricultural research. The Millers suggested we consider independent housing, not from any desire to see us leave, but recognition of our growing stability. The prospect terrified me. I'd never signed a lease, paid utilities, or managed a household without oversight. But Samuel needed to see me capable of full independence. We found a small apartment near his school and my work. The Millers co-signed the lease and helped us navigate utility connections, grocery budgeting, and furniture acquisition from thrift stores. Our first night there, Samuel and I sat on the floor eating pizza, marveling at walls that belonged to us. Challenges persisted. Nightmares still came, though less frequently. Certain triggers, aggressive men, religious rhetoric, medical emergencies, could send either of us spiraling, but we'd learned to recognize the signs and seek help before drowning. Samuel started high school with confidence I'd never imagined possible. He joined the environmental club, made honor roll, and even attended school dances. Watching him navigate normal teenage experiences felt like witnessing miracles Dad would never understand. My work at the greenhouse led to consultation opportunities with other nurseries. My expertise in medicinal plants, gained through such dark circumstances, now helped others cultivate healing gardens. I spoke at garden clubs about sustainable growing practices, finding my voice in rooms full of strangers. 2 years after our escape, Martha sent news that made me cry. The reformed compound had delivered its 100th healthy baby, trained midwives, proper medical equipment, and immediate hospital access when needed. Everything we'd been denied. Those 100 living children were the truest repudiation of Dad's doctrine. Samuel decided he wanted to become a teacher, inspired by those who'd helped him catch up academically. He volunteered as a tutor and counselor at summer camps for at-risk youth. His gentleness with struggling students reflected hard-won empathy. I enrolled in a 4-year university program, juggling classes with work and parenting. My younger classmates often sought my advice, drawn by something they couldn't quite name, perhaps the gravity that comes from surviving what shouldn't be survivable. The anniversary of Mom's death arrived with unexpected peace. Samuel and I visited her grave carrying fresh flowers and handwritten letters. We read them aloud, telling her about our new lives, our dreams, our gratitude for the love she'd given despite Dad's poison. The cemetery felt less like an ending and more like a conversation with someone who'd always believed we deserved better. That evening, Samuel showed me his college applications. He'd chosen schools with strong education programs, writing essays about transformation and resilience. I signed the parental consent forms with hands that had once delivered babies in darkness, now guiding my brother toward light. We mailed them together, another step forward in lives Dad had tried to end. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. The nonprofit had helped 50 more people escape various cults that year. She'd included a photo from their recent gathering, faces I didn't recognize but whose expressions I understood. Survivors building futures from fractured foundations. Samuel graduated high school with honors, accepted to his first choice university. As he walked across the stage, I thought of all the moments that had led here. From that first breath I'd helped him take to this achievement Dad said we'd never reach. My tears weren't grief anymore, but something harder to name, perhaps what hope feels like when it's finally safe to feel it. I received my bachelor's degree degree the same month, immediately starting graduate research on medicinal plants. My thesis advisor encouraged me to document traditional herbal knowledge before it disappeared. The irony wasn't lost on me, preserving wisdom from the same traditions that had nearly destroyed us. We packed Samuel's dorm room together, buying extra supplies because abundance still felt precious. His roommate seemed nice, a kid from the suburbs who'd never questioned why Samuel sometimes checked locks twice or kept emergency supplies. My brother had learned to pass for normal while carrying his truth privately. The drive home alone felt strange, but not scary. I had my own life now. Research, teaching assistantships, consulting work that supported us both. The apartment echoed without Samuel, but I filled it with plants that cleaned the air and reminded me growth was always possible. He called that first night, homesick but determined. We talked until his anxiety eased, and I reminded him that surviving didn't mean never struggling. It meant knowing you could survive the struggles. He had my number, Victoria's, the Millers, and a counselor on campus. Networks of support Dad had tried to deny us. I stood at my window watching students pass below, young people pursuing dreams with casual confidence. Tomorrow I'd teach them about plant biology, sharing knowledge freely given. Tonight, I simply stood witness to ordinary lives unfolding, the most extraordinary gift for those who'd been denied ordinary for so long. My phone showed messages from Samuel, settled in, making friends, Victoria, new rescue underway, Martha, another healthy birth, and Mrs. Turner, greenhouse expansion approved. Each connection proved Dad's greatest lie, that we were alone, dependent on his twisted mercy. We'd built something he never could, chosen family, genuine faith in each other, and futures written by our own hands. Wow. Samuel swinging that branch like a tiny warrior to protect his sister? Yeah, that kid just won Best Brother of the Year, hands down. Honestly, that moment hit harder than half the action movies I've seen this year. And don't even get me started on the irony of Dad being saved by the same people he tried to destroy. Wild. Anyway, if you stuck around for this whole story, thank you. Like the video. It helps more than you think.